All right, let's get started. Everybody take your seats, please. We've got a good session coming up. We've got two great speakers, and then we've got a Q&A session after that. Let me go over a couple things. First of all, each one of them will do a program separately, so hold your questions, then we'll do a Q&A after that. But we'll have microphones on the floor, but if you really want to be a techie, what you can do, you can see on the table, there is a description where you can text in the question. And so all you do is just, instead of typing in a name, you'll type in that 22-333, and then in the message, you'll put that ND Expo 19, and then leave a space, and then type in your message. Now, here's one thing that's not on there, I don't think. It's a 160-character limitation, so it's like the old Twitter, and by the time you take off the ND Expo 19, you're down to, in the space, you're down to about 150. So just be aware of that, that it does have a character limitation on that. So let's get started with this session, which I know that you're interested in. Certainly I am. I'd first like to introduce our first speaker. He is the U.S. Soybean Export Council CEO. He was raised on a crop and cattle farm in northeast Colorado. And of course, the U.S. Soy Export Council, they're particularly interested in building preference for U.S. soy and for access to markets. So please, nice round of applause for Jim Sutter.
Thanks, sir. Thank you very much. Well, good morning. Great to be here with all of you. Thanks for the opportunity. I was asked, and I couldn't quite tell why they were asking so soon. I was thinking about this morning. I was asked it was either April, and then in July, I think they confirmed that I would come to this. And I was wondering, why would you ask me in July about coming to Fargo? And then I got to thinking about, well, maybe they were worried about the weather today. You know, and then as I was getting ready to come up here earlier this week, I checked out, went on Weather Channel and I checked out the weather for Fargo, and I was actually quite pleased to see that the air quality index is excellent for the air here in Fargo. So maybe the rest of it not so good, but all kidding aside, I grew up in Colorado. I love snow, so it's great to see it, and you folks know how to deal with it very well here. So in my presentation this morning, I want to talk to you about what our organization does, and how we fit in with other organizations in what we call the soy family, and then talk a little bit about U.S. soy exports and what we're doing to try and make sure exports continue to move out of the country. So our role is to try and differentiate and build a preference for U.S. soy and ensure that we have market access for U.S. soy. And we do that through a global network of offices that we have around the world, a global team that we have. We have about 125 people altogether. 45 of our people are based in St. Louis, and the balance of our people are scattered around the world in many different countries. American Soybean Association was the first national organization representing soy. They're about to celebrate a 100th anniversary. That's quite an accomplishment. Initially, they were the organization that did international marketing, opening their first office in Tokyo in 1956. So when you think about that, that's quite a while ago. They started their international marketing efforts. What is that, 62 years ago? Then, of course, all the state organizations started developing and continued to develop. Then the National Checkoff was founded in 1992. It says 1990 there. I think that's when it started. 1992 it was actually formed. And then in 2005, the American Soybean Association and the United Soybean Board, the National Checkoff, got together and formed USSEC to be an international marketing arm representing all of U.S. soy. So that's when USSEC was formed. I joined USSEC in 2010, the very end of 2010. We're governed by a board. We have 15 people on our board, made up of representatives from ASA, USB, and then 7 industry reps. We're very well covered from North Dakota. We have Darren Cadillac from the United Soybean Board, Monty Peterson from the American Soybean Association, and Aaron Skyberg from SK Foods as an exporter class representative. So of our 15 board members, 3 come from North Dakota. And I think they're all extremely interested in the export markets, and as you all know, exports are very important to North Dakota. So no surprise that they're interested in that. So here is just I call this our membership collage. And as I mentioned, we have members all the way from A to Z, and we literally do. We have about 100 organizations that are members of USSEC. And I think we're very pleased by that because it gives us, as we go to talk with people around the world about who we represent, We represent the growers and the industry as well, and I think that really gives us the opportunity to speak and have good interaction with international buyers and international governments because they know we have a very wide group that we're representing. The funding that we have comes roughly 2/3 from the national checkoff, or the checkoffs in general, both national and states checkoff. The second large portion of our funding comes from the Foreign Agricultural Service, from USDA, and then we also have some industry funding and mainly support in in-kind programs with industry, but also some financial contributions. But there you can see the pie that represents our funding. I mentioned it earlier, but just to remind you, we differentiate and build preference for U.S. soy. That's really a key thing that we're trying to do, as well as ensuring market access for U.S. soy, because market access is so critical, and it's becoming more and more complicated as different countries put tariffs, non-tariff trade barriers, things like biotech approvals, weed seed issues we've been facing recently, all kinds of things like that our team is very busy working on around the world. We have 3 main operational platforms that we use as we do our work. We call it trade servicing. Think of that as marketing, being out talking with people about U.S. soy. I was just talking with Rick Ostley, former president of the American Soybean Association. He was recounting being in Japan years ago, talking with Japanese buyers, and they said, we're going to continue buying U.S. soy because you're here asking us what you can do to improve your product for us. And I think that's just a great example of how important it is that we get our growers out and get our industry out, talk with our international buyers. On the left side of that picture, you see Darren Kadlik. That was taken in late last calendar year in Korea, where he was speaking at an event for us. Then you see the kind of technical work we do. Depending on the market, we do technical work helping people use the latest technology in producing swine or poultry or aquaculture, those kind of things. And then we do the market access work that I referred to. The picture on the right is a group called the International Soy Growers Alliance, where we get together growers from the key South American producing countries and the U.S. and Canada. And while we may all compete, we have issues where it's important that we go and talk with people with one voice so we don't get kind of played off back and forth. So particularly on things like biotech approvals, we go as the International Soy Growers Alliance, or ISGA, and try and represent ourselves that way. So those are really 3 key ways that we try to do our work around the world. I just want to give you a little glimpse at the message we talk about with people when we go out and do international marketing campaigns. We talk a lot about the innovation in U.S. ag, and innovation particularly in soybeans that are being produced. We talk about how U.S. soy, and I think Mark talked about it earlier in his comments this morning, if you heard those, how U.S. consumers and international consumers, they tend to think that soybeans are grown by ADM or Bunge or Cargill, and that those are the people behind it. We try hard to change that impression because we think it plays much better when people understand that, yes, those may be the people who have the vast network of being able to ship soybeans around the world, but really it's growers and it's their families that are producing those soybeans. So we try to personalize that and talk about the fantastic growers that we have in many places around the U.S. that grow our soybeans. And it's also, we try to talk about the full service that our organization provides. So it's not just that they're buying the soybeans and then we're going to go away. We want to be there to do all the things I just told you about, the way we try to help them, and also continue to connect them with U.S. growers so they can participate in this innovation. You know, you all know innovation probably better than I do and the things you specifically do on your farms. But it is very impressive when we bring international grower groups out and they get to see the things from the GPS technology that you use from planting to apply your chemicals to the harvesting. They love to see the way that drones operate. We oftentimes have quite a few different groups we bring to the U.S. in August or September, kind of during the height of when the crop is just getting ready to mature, and they are always very, very impressed with the innovation that we provide. And then kind of behind the scenes innovation that they don't see is the continued innovation in the seeds that are used. You know, the things like, and it's small so far today, but I think it will continue to grow, the high oleic soybean oil that provides a slightly different type of oil in the soybean, and then the work that is being done to improve the nutrient profile. They're very interested in that innovation that is going on, and that's oftentimes invested in by the United Soybean Board, the checkoff, and then as well, of course, by the seed companies as well. We talk about sustainability, and I know we've been talking about sustainability probably for, I don't know how many years. Ever since I have been at USSEC, it's been a term, and I know initially when we started talking about sustainability, farmers became very sort of edgy about this topic because they thought it meant that people would be out trying to tell them how to farm. And it is maybe a little bit that way, but what I try to tell people is we have customers around the world, and whether it's here in the US or in many, many countries, whether it's highly developed or developing countries, there's a certain segment of the market that wants to know how their food's produced. And how, you know, that includes how our soybeans grow, because soybeans go into so many different things that are consumed. And so they want to know that. Here in the U.S., we have a very, very good message to talk about. Thanks to the work that you growers do, thanks to the Soil Conservation Service that was formed in 1935, and literally we've had billions and billions and billions of dollars invested in conservation programs over that period of time, you know, by the government and by farmers. We have a wonderful message in terms of sustainability. So I don't have time to get into it today, but we've developed something called the U.S. Soybean Sustainability Assurance Protocol, or SSAP, we call it for short. And it is a way that international buyers can verify the sustainability of the U.S. soy that they are purchasing. And again, thanks to you growers and your participation in the U.S. government conservation programs and the way that all of our laws work, we have a real leg up on the competition in the area of sustainability. So we're happy to talk with people about that. And I then I tell growers, when you get international buyers or even U.S. buyers on your farm and they start to talk about sustainability, you can smile and think, I've got a good message here. This is a competitive advantage for the U.S. It's not something you need to get defensive about. You know, we have sometimes we complain about the locks and dams on our rivers that we have in the U.S. or the service that railroads provide, or maybe even the roadways that we have, but we have it so much better than the other producing countries around the world. And because of that, we are able to deliver to our international buyers a very reliable supply. So that's something that we talk about and that we should be very proud of that we have here. And we want a long-term partnership. I mentioned that we try to take growers out and we try to introduce them to our international buyers. Some of you have probably hosted trade teams from around the world on your farms, and we appreciate that. But that's how we really try to develop this long-term partnership that's taking place between the U.S. soy industry, starting with growers, all the way through the supply chain and international buyers. So this is just a snapshot of the world, obviously. The dark green is where we actually have USSEC representatives. The light green is where other countries that we would service. So you see there's a very long list there. And so I don't want to tell you that we actually do intensive work in all those countries. Those are places where if there are buyers that are buying U.S. soy, we can help them if they need help. Those are, in a couple minutes, I'll talk to you more about the countries we're actually focused on. 60% of the U.S. soy has been exported in the last few years. This year, you see the downturn there. USDA is predicting it will be only 52% this year, and quite honestly, that's why we have the big carryout projection. We're doing everything we can to make sure that isn't what happens. We don't want to see our exports drop like that. People say, maybe we should just export all of the soy that gets exported in the form of meat. And we work very closely together with the meat industry and with our counterparts, USMEF and USSEC, to try and help support meat exports. But that blue line at the bottom is the amount of soy that's exported in meat. So we'd love to see that double and continue to grow and work closely to do that, but it won't ever replace the exports of soy. So we can't export it all as meat. That's the reason I show you this slide. We started doing our work in China in 1982, 36 years ago. China grew, we can't take all the credit for that, obviously, but I think our industry, I think the work that U.S. soy farmers invested in took about 12 years before the first import actually happened after that work started. But look at that blue line. Look at the growth in Chinese demand and the way it overtook all of the red line is global trade to all of their destinations. So it just shows you how big China is in terms of the world's market. The downturn there is because of this trade war situation and the concern that they may consume a little less. But China's very important. And I would say the yellow line is U.S. soybean acres. They've grown from 70 to 90 million acres over the period on that chart. And I think it's really because of the growth in Chinese soy demand. They were the largest growth market. And I like this next chart. If you look at North Dakota soybean acres and Chinese soybean imports, it's really, and you think about how many North Dakota beans go off the PNW, you know, it's really been a critical part of what's driving the growth of soy acres here in North Dakota. This was our 35th anniversary celebration we just had in China a couple of years ago. We're in our 36th year now, but we had good participation. There's a grower from North Dakota in the right rear corner there. I don't know if anybody can spot him. Austin was there with us celebrating and we went around and met with lots of industry people, and they were very appreciative of all the work that's been done by U.S. soy over the years. So I think people ask me, what's going to happen with the market? What's going to happen with exports? I'm not telling you anything when I say the biggest swing factor in the market really boils down to these two people. You know, we're in a critical time here. There are U.S. negotiators in Beijing right now. I think the negotiations on ag only, from my perspective, are going, from what I hear, I'm not there, but I get a little bit of feedback, I think they're going well in terms of ag. But it's an overarching agreement that has to be reached. So we'll have to watch very carefully over the next 20 days or so and see what happens by March 1st in terms of what kind of an agreement's going to come out. I am optimistic. I'm an optimist at heart, but I am also optimistic that both of these guys would like to have something good come out of this rather than something bad. So I'm hopeful that we can get our trade back into shape, and you all saw how important China is. So I think that would be a critical thing for us to be watching. So what's our short-term strategy? You know we have a problem with China, so we're trying to move the pile. You know, talking about a 920 million bushel carryout here in the U.S., nobody wants to see that happen. We need to move the pile. So we launched an effort last summer called our What It Takes initiative, where we're trying to short-term find a replacement for the China market, looking at other long-standing markets we've had, Europe, Mexico, Japan, plus a lot of other developing countries where we are going to, so trying to replace the market. We track it. Here's what our numbers came up with. We added up every country in the world and said, okay, how do we get exports to be about unchanged with a much smaller number? And we came up with numbers to do that. Here's the way we track that. You probably can't see the numbers. We track it every week as USDA releases their export numbers. And we're doing pretty well. We're up 80% in non-China markets. So our exports to non-China destinations are up 80% this year versus last year. But our exports to China are down more. Now, if we go through the balance of the year and continue to see good growth in non-China markets, then we'll get close to where we want to be at the end of the year. But it would sure be a lot better if we get China back in the fold. And I'm cautiously optimistic, as I said, that that can happen. But we're watching this very carefully, and that's what our strategy is. Here's just a look at the top 10 markets. You can see how big China is relative to the other countries. So that's why we have to cast our net very, very wide if we want to try and make up China in other markets. So what about our long-term strategy? And this is really where we're working hard to try and build future markets. And so thinking about what will the next China be? Where will that next market be that will consume soy to that extent? We have a long-term strategy of trying to go to markets where big populations, increasing economies, and low protein consumption today, trying to help those markets learn how to use soy, trying to make sure that we help them understand that they have a protein deficiency, a place like India in particular, so that they start in the future becoming big importers of soy. We've characterized the markets into different types. We're focusing that effort really in that basic market segment, and think of India, Nigeria, Myanmar as places where that's happening. And there's just a look. I mentioned how many countries we're focusing on that bottom. We've done a lot of work on identifying the key countries we work on. We have 48 countries, 14 in that basic space that we're working on. Because we can't, you know, there's 232 countries in the world that we started our strategy work with. We boiled it down to 48. That's still a lot for us to be working on. I want to just give you a little hope with a couple of things. China's consumption of soy, look at that over the last 25 years. Here's growth of soy in the Asia subcontinent. So think India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. The chart looks pretty similar. Slightly different scales. China grew 14 million tons in the first 10 years, whereas the Asia subcontinent only grew 7 million tons in the first 10 years. But I'm quite optimistic when I see that because the growth trend is there and it's very strong. So I think we're growing in those other markets. This is the production of chicken meat. The US is the red line, China is the yellow line, and India is the blue line. We're putting a lot of faith and putting a lot of efforts into trying to help India continue to grow their poultry production because people there like to consume poultry, and we think it will consume a lot of soy in years to come when they consume more of that. And finally, I just want to say, you know, I think this is a tough time in agriculture, and people tend to get kind of downtrodden about that. But more food is going to be needed in the next 50 years than was consumed in the last 7,000. We've got a huge number of people in that circle. Over half of the world's population lives in that circle in Asia, so it's important we continue to focus our efforts there, and particularly for a place like North Dakota, going off the PNW to service that part of the world, you're very well positioned to do that. Here's the global demand growth we see. Soybeans are the top line, corn's the second line, so it's good to be in those two businesses. It's good that this is a soy and corn expo because you see nice growth there. So I'd just like to leave you with a thought that we are in a growth business. You guys are helping to feed the world. We appreciate that. Thanks for being such good, sustainable farmers, giving us the great communication tool we have with that. And thanks for the opportunity to be here with you today.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks. Does she need a clicker? All right, thanks, Jim. And remember, he's going to be back to handle some Q&A in just a while. Our second presenter here this morning is Leslie McNitt. She is with the National Corn Growers Association and is Director of Public Policy for Biotechnology and Trade, International Trade. Prior to that, she was with the USDA as Chief of Staff with the Farm Service Agency and also with the Farm and Foreign Ag Services. So please welcome Leslie McNitt.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning. Oh, I forgot I'm mic'd up. Let me move this one out of the way. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here with you today. I flew in from Washington yesterday. I really appreciate the weather this week compared to how I heard it was last week. And I'm going to talk with you a little bit about, I think you're probably familiar with the National Corn Growers Association, but talk to you more specifically about how we're working for you. Many of you in the room are members, and you know, are members across the country, and specifically what we're doing on trade. I will have probably a little bit more of a policy bent because I'm the trade lobbyist, so that's what I do. But I'll try and stay out of the political weeds for you. So just want to quick kind of update you on how NCGA is working for you. You know, obviously I work on trade, I work on transportation, a little bit on biotech issues, but you know, we're really cognizant all throughout the staff at NCGA that the farm economy is not great right now, and we need to be focusing a lot of our attention on driving demand for corn and corn products. So we're really looking to help you grow out of this tough economy and create market opportunities, whether that's through our work in the domestic ethanol market, whether it's trade, working with the livestock industry to increase demand, driving preferences for your product through sustainable farming practices, sort of a similar approach to what Jim was talking about with soy, and also new uses. And we're also working on consumer engagement. And Mark spoke about that earlier today, and just making sure that consumers have a better understanding of the hard work that you do and the way that you do it. So, I'll talk a little bit about why trade is so important for you. Why does it matter, right? It's kind of an ambiguous or abstract topic for a lot of folks, but corn and corn product exports, so I'm talking about everything from corn, corn meal and feed, DDGS, ethanol, and even livestock exports. We think about livestock exports as corn moving in their bellies across the ocean. So all those products, that accounts for about 33% of your income. And, in North Dakota, corn exports supported about 1,600 jobs in 2016 and contributed $535 million to North Dakota state economy. So it's really a significant economic driver, both at the farm gate and across your state. So like USSEC, the corn industry has a market development organization. Now I've kind of outlined what we're working on at NCGA, working with the domestic industry, working on the public policy and communications front. And you can see there, I kind of broke down some of the key activities of the U.S. Grains Council. U.S. Grains Council is our sister organization and does that market development and export promotion work that is so important to really helping ensure that corn farmers continue to be the most competitive, U.S. corn farmers continue to be the most competitive around the world, and make sure that demand for your products continues to grow. So, they're doing a lot of work similar to our friends at USSEC, like Jim outlined, to develop customer relationships, share information about why the product you produce is superior to competitors from, Ukraine or Brazil. And they also work for barley and sorghum, and they have a diverse pool of funders like USSEC as well. So this chart, I won't spend a lot of time on, but it just shows you sort of the growth curve of corn and corn products exports over the years. And you can see that exports have been on the rise, which is great. Like I said, it's an important part of your bottom line and really diversifying your portfolio. But if you look at the categories, the dark blue, almost navy color there on the bottom is direct corn exports. And then the various other forms of corn that we export or value-added products are layered on top of that. That light blue sort of chunk there on the very top shows ethanol exports, and that's a really important growth area for us, and one that we're really focused on at NCGA and that the Grains Council is very focused on as well. The Grains Council is looking to drive, to increase corn exports to about 5.3 billion bushels, corn in all forms, by 2022. And thinks that we can grow to about 4 billion gallons of ethanol exports. We were at about 1.62 billion last year. So NCGA's trade priorities, the way that we identify our priorities, certainly, trade has increased overall as a priority for NCGA and on the minds of our farmer members. I think trade's probably been a top 5, maybe top 10 issue historically for NCGA, and in the last few years, it's one of the top things that we hear about. And so, we kind of bucket our trade policy priorities in 4 pillars, we'll say. The first is preserving and expanding existing markets. The second is pursuing new markets and new trade agreements, right? So first is defense, second is offense. Promoting corn products globally, and a lot of that has to do with creating a policy environment that supports the great work that our partners at the U.S. Grains Council do around the world. And then mitigating barriers to the export of corn and corn products. And then we base those, within those fall sort of our top current and future markets, and that's how we prioritize all the things we want to work on trade. So I've got just a few slides here that show where corn is going in various forms. So here you can see Mexico, Japan, South Korea, Colombia, and Peru are the top 5 countries that we're exporting corn to. And this shows ethanol. Like I said, we exported about 1.62 billion gallons of ethanol last year. Brazil, Canada, India, the EU, and China round out our top 5. China's more like a top 3 market typically, but because of our ongoing trade dispute, we are not currently moving ethanol to China. And then finally, just another focus on DDGS, which is also a really big market for us, or a big product for our exports. And Mexico's #1 there too, but we switch it up a little bit. Turkey, South Korea, Vietnam, and Thailand. So you can see kind of the importance of Asia increasingly for us. So I want to talk a little bit about NAFTA. As I said, we look at our top markets, and Mexico for sure is the top export market for corn. NAFTA, has been a really, really important deal for us. We send about 1/4 of our corn exports to Mexico. We send a lot of ethanol up to Canada. I know you do, especially here in North Dakota. Our exports to Canada have tripled since NAFTA went into force and have quintupled to Mexico. So all in all, last year, this was a $3.2 billion market for us. I just can't emphasize enough how important this has been and how that is a really key driver of what we work on in my office and what so many farmers who are involved in advocacy through NCGA and North Dakota Corn have been engaged on. So this graph actually shows you a lot of different commodities, and this is Mexico specific, but it just gives you a picture of our market share. In the red there, second column from the left, that's corn. We've got 96% market share in Mexico. The little blues, rest of the world, that's mostly Brazil, Argentina, but Mexico is an incredible customer for us, and a lot of other commodities call Mexico their top export destination as well. So for the last couple years, one of the things that we've really been working on has been to defend NAFTA and really make the case for the benefits of this agreement, because we have been under threat of NAFTA going away. This administration has been talking about pulling out of NAFTA for the last couple years, and I would say the agriculture sector has been the primary champion, really making the case for why the relationship with Mexico and Canada is so important. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce estimates that NAFTA supports 14 million jobs in the U.S. And our industries have become really interconnected and integrated over time. So this is a very economically significant agreement. And as you can see, this is just corn. So the Grains Council commissioned a study as we were looking at the real prospect of NAFTA going away and said, okay, what happens? How do we even, we've had this agreement in place for 24 years. We've kind of taken for granted what it means to us and how important it's been. What does it mean? We have a 0% tariff rate right now, which means it's really easy for Mexican customers to buy our corn without paying a tax on it. Well, if we lose NAFTA, that could go up to 37%. That was the largest tariff rate we could face before NAFTA was in place. So if that were to happen, and we expect that it would, we'd be looking at about $1.2 billion in lost grains production, $13 billion hit to the farm sector GDP, and one study that I've read suggests 256,000 jobs would be lost across the U.S. economy. I've also seen studies that suggest closer to 1 million jobs lost. So not to mention how crazy the markets would go, which is really hard to even predict. So with that being said, I think it's important to acknowledge that all that hard work has paid off, knock on wood, in that we still have NAFTA in place. And again, I think farmers are really at the front of that charge, and it's much appreciated. I think that is kind of accepted as fact in Washington, that farmers have been the biggest and most important advocates for this agreement. And I'm happy to say that toward the end of 2018, President Trump and the presidents of Mexico and Canada signed the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or NAFTA 2.0 as we call it for short, which was a modernized agreement between the three countries. It captures industries that didn't even exist when NAFTA went into force in 1994. I mean, things like digital trade and e-commerce. I mean, if you think about whole industries that didn't even exist or were in their very infant forms. So it modernized a lot of things. I think what's really important to understand why this is important to us is, one, it locks in this relationship. So if NAFTA goes away and USMCA is in place, your zero tariff market access stays the same, and you can keep exporting and keep that market. But it does a few other things that are really positive that will help make trade more efficient and hopefully more profitable for you. Things like an enforceable sanitary and phytosanitary standard, which ensures, frankly, that things like animal and plant health risk issues don't become trade barriers or don't become disruptive to our trade, but that each country can focus on those things, but they must adhere to science-based standards, and that if there is an issue, if there is, say, a shipment stopped at the border with Mexico, there's a rapid response mechanism of 5 days, which is a record for any trade agreement. And that means that there's going to be a real quick conversation about here's the problem, here's how we fix it, and you're not waiting for a year like we had to wait to resolve an issue on DDGs with one of our top export markets, Vietnam. Think about all the money that's lost while you're waiting to iron those things out. So it's really going to help streamline the way that we trade. There's a biotech, the binding biotech provision in there that streamlines the way that we share information about biotech approvals with Mexico and Canada. We've never had that before. It even recognizes new plant breeding innovations. So we don't have too much trouble from Mexico and Canada on those issues. But as I'll talk about a little bit later, there are other countries where we hope that this trade agreement will serve as a blueprint for what future agreements might look like, and really set that standard. And I think what's really also important is if we can get USMCA ratified in Congress, because that's the next step, then that will build confidence in our other trading partners that we're here to engage, we're here to compete, and we have a great template for how we do that. So we can kind of get off defense a little bit and get back on offense and start looking at new markets. So my sort of call to action for all of you and my request is asking for your help to make the case that Congress needs to pass the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. We expect that a vote could happen sometime between now and August recess. So if you have opportunities to engage with your elected representatives, we hope that that will be something that you really push for. If we don't have USMCA in place, it is possible that we could lose NAFTA, and then we are, we're losing out to competitors much further away from markets that are right next door. Japan's our #2 export market. We sent about $2.3 billion worth of corn to Japan in the 2017-18 market year. This kind of falls under that pursue new markets, new trade agreements. Japan has long been an important market for corn, but we don't have an agreement there. Japan, as was the U.S., part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, but the U.S. withdrew from that agreement. So we've been really pushing the administration to get on an agreement with Japan as soon as possible. At the end of 2018, the Japanese and U.S. governments announced that they would be entering into free trade agreement negotiations. We were very pleased to see that. We're hoping those negotiations start very soon. Because the Trans-Pacific Partnership moved forward under a new name, CPTPP, and that means that all U.S. commodities are really competing for market share. Like I said, we have great market share in Japan, but we could see a declining preference for U.S. corn, and we also know that there's a lot of growth potential for our friends in the livestock sector, beef and pork. They're about to really lose their competitive advantage. In fact, that's starting to erode right now. And if they can compete in Japan for that huge market, that helps us move more corn as well. So that's important to us. I know Jim talked a lot about China. I didn't plan to spend a ton of time there because this is such an issue that's important to the soy industry, but China is important to us too because it's the elephant in the room, right? I mean, it's such a huge potential market, and we've had a lot of challenges there, but the upside is too big to ignore. We used to move more corn to China before 2013, and then we had a biotech issue there. So in recent years, it's been more of a market for DDGs and for ethanol. But with today's ongoing trade dispute, we are not moving those products there. And the Grains Council estimates that the disruption, particularly in ethanol exports to China in 2018 alone, probably cost our industry about $370 million. And you can see there's a long sort of roster there of issues that we are trying to work through with China, and that we've been working with the administration. The administration has prioritized a lot of the issues that are important to corn in their negotiations with China, but there are much bigger picture issues that they're working to address, like IP protections, forced technology transfer, some of the things that are really core to the way China does business and plans its economy long term. And so those are difficult problems to unravel. But what we've seen, what we've seen is a lot of delays in biotech approvals that really impact your innovation pipeline and make it harder for us to export corn. We see, China has huge domestic stocks of corn and a lot of ag subsidies. We've got a couple WTO cases against China for those issues to make sure that they're not, their domestic policies aren't discriminating and driving down the price of corn for farmers all over the world. And we're not alone in that. Wheat and rice are also part of those cases. And so, we are watching these negotiations very closely, like everybody else. And have said, to the extent that you're going to deal on trade, please include our priorities, and I believe that the administration's doing that. But certainly, and I'll touch on the tariffs a little bit more later, certainly we in agriculture don't want to be collateral damage for some of these bigger picture disputes. I talked a little bit about trying to create a policy environment that supports export promotion and the great work that the U.S. Grains Council does. So the programs that do that are the MAP and FMD programs, and those are programs that are authorized and funded in the Farm Bill, which just passed, thankfully. And I think we can all claim a win there because this has been another big trade priority. And the Farm Bill not only reauthorized these programs, but protected FMD's funding, which was at risk of going away, and even plussed up the overall funding by a few $1 million a year. And so that really ensures that the great work that USSEC and the Grains Council and other cooperators do around the world can continue. And then I talked a little bit, our fourth pillar is just trying to mitigate barriers to trade. And the tariffs have proven to be a big barrier to trade, but we also see resistance to agricultural innovation from a number of countries. India would be a great, when we talk about next markets, India would be a great one. But they're anti-biotech in India, and so figuring out ways to have conversations with our trading partners about technology and production techniques that American farmers use is a priority for us, and to make sure that they're not erecting artificial barriers in an effort to protect their own industries, sort of disguised as concerns about the safety of these technologies. Other SPS and technical barriers, similar things. I mean, you might see a country erect a new technical barrier to trade. That could be something like just sort of changing up a domestic regulation on how they label a product that makes it harder for us to ship a product there. That's what we mean when we talk about technical barriers, or that's at least one example. Or hearing we have a new fumigation policy, so you're gonna have to turn the shipment of products around. Those types of things cost money. And they make it harder for you to compete, and a lot of times they're disguising basically just protectionism. So, these are things that we want trade policy to address, and then our friends at the Grains Council are really working in the markets day in and day out to address. And then, tariffs, we're dealing with a lot of different tariffs. I know everyone's focused on China and the tariffs, the 301 tariffs there that have really caused retaliation on our friends in the soy industry, on us, and ethanol a little bit, and then also, pork has borne a lot of the brunt, dairy, and we're concerned about that. So we're going to keep working on that, and also we have tariffs on Mexico and Canada too right now that are standing potentially in the way of getting this new trade agreement wrapped up. So just want to close with that. let you know that we are going to continue to work for you, and we look forward to continuing this discussion and really appreciate our partnership with North Dakota Corn.
All right, if I call Jim back up, come on up, Jim. And we've got time for just a couple questions directed to either ones. You can still text if you want to. Go ahead, try that. I know you can do it. I know you can do it. My mom at 85, I got her on an iPad, got her up with technology, although she did tell me the other day she wanted to be on Twitter. And I said, why? She said, because she wanted to do some twerking. Mom, that is not what Twitter is. So it's right. The instructions are right there. Questions, we can take them from the floor, and Leslie is going to be watching the text. So, questions? A little hard for me to see. Shout it out.
I've got one here if you want me to start.
Okay,
while
sure.
folks are
Let's start with
getting
the
mics.
text. Got the text.
Then we've got a couple. Okay, Jim, is the growth in shipments to other countries just pulling ahead annual shipments versus just growth?
I would say it's recapturing U.S. market share in those markets. Particularly if you take Europe, for example, the previous year our market share was between 35 and 40%. This year it's between 75 and 80%. So it's really market share growth in non-China markets.
Okay, good question.
Oh, looks like got one over there.
All right, right there. Still no mic?
Okay, so I'll just shout it out.
Okay.
I can't text fast enough. The question is, what are you seeing as far as regarding the trade war with the effects of Chinese domestic production of soybeans? Would you consider it, if it's increasing, or would you consider it a considerable measure or a factor to take in for overall economic trade with the U.S.?
Why don't you paraphrase that a
So I
little
think
bit
the
too?
question is about domestic Chinese soybean production given the trade war and what's happening with that?
Yeah, are you seeing an increase in it? And if so, do you consider it a measurable factor?
Okay. So China has been talking about wanting to increase their soybean production. So just sort of rough numbers, China last year imported 90 million tons of soybeans and they grew about 15. So they import way more than they produce. They have a plan that by 2023 they want to get their domestic production up to 20 million tons. We think that maybe they can achieve that. It depends on, they have a lot of levers they can pull in terms of incentives they can provide. But in terms of, I think your question was, will it be a significant factor? And we think not. We think that they really have no plans to become a major soybean producer. I think they, years ago, made a decision, and that where they located their crushing industry, that they were going to import the soy that they use and then grow more the other staples, corn, wheat, rice, that they feed domestically. So I think they're going to grow a little bit of soybean production. We don't see it becoming a major factor.
All right, we're going to wrap this up, but remember, these folks are going to be around during lunch afterwards. We're going to take a stretch break here, and then 11:15 we will start with the hot topic. They're going to be on part of that hot topic panel, so take your stretch break. We'll see you here at 11:15. Give these folks a nice round.